first thing that we want to do in this DVD is do a real quick run through or a grand tour of the camcorder so that we understand where all the buttons and knobs and levers and handles and how the ergonomics of the camera functions so that you'll be able to find those things. So while we're watching this section, I recommend that you get your HMC150 and hold it in your hands and kind of follow along so that you're quickly able to identify and get used to the ergonomics of the camcorder and know where the buttons and the different switches are located. Now we're going to start on the front of the camcorder and move our way to the left and the back and around to the front. So let's start with the lens hood. Now one of the things about the lens hood in the 150 is that it doesn't have anything that locks the lens hood in place, so it's reasonably easy to bump. When you first get the camcorder and take it out of the box, the lens hood snaps on fairly tightly, but after you use it a little bit more, some of the plastic inside the hood here starts to wear out. So you want to be just aware of that because it does knock itself out of place fairly easily. The remedy that I've had for this is I've just taken a small piece of gaffer's tape and put the small piece of gaffer's tape on one of the latches in here, and that tightens it down just enough without doing any damage to the plastic. When the gaffer's tape wears out, simply replace it. Now you will be taking this on and off fairly often if you're using a wide-angle lens adapter or if you're using any kind of a matte box or rail system, you'll be pulling this off. So just be aware that over time this can wear out. So let's step back just a little bit. Coming from the lens hood back, here we have the focus ring. Now this focus ring can also be set up to be an iris control or an aperture control if you'd like. There's a switch on the side of the camera we'll come to in just a moment that allows you to change this from being a focal control or focus control to being an aperture control. Straight behind that we have a zoom control. Now the zoom can either be manual or controlled by a servo. In other words, you can control it via a switch on the top or on the side of the camcorder, just pretty well like any other semi-professional camcorder that's out there. Now, I prefer to use this in manual mode, but if you're using it only in servo mode, you'll notice we've got this small little knob right here. This knob that's on there can be removed if you find that it's in your way when you're using it in servo mode, or maybe you simply just don't want it there in manual mode. It's entirely dependent on what you're familiar with and how you want to work with the camera. So this gets us kind of past the barrel housing, the lens hood, the focus ring or aperture ring, and the zoom. And it brings us into some of the different switches that we find on the camcorder. So the switches are going to take a little bit of time to go through, so bear with me here as we get into where each one of these different things is located. Okay. Starting right up here in the top, we've got a focus assist switch. The focus assist switch is very important. Why? Because when you're dealing with HD, it's very, very important that you're focused. And focus in HD is not always easy, especially with small LCD viewfinders or when we're working with the EVF viewfinders like this. It's difficult to work very well in HD. So in order to check what's happening with our focus, we're going to use this focus assist button. And basically what this does is when we press it, it doubles in or it doubles the zoom on the subject so that we can see what's happening. And we'll look at how that works a little bit later on. But get used to this switch and it fits very nicely under your thumb. And in fact, one great way to get used to working is cradling the camera instead of trying to work over the top and work around the buttons. Get used to using your thumb to operate most of the buttons on this camcorder because your thumb is the tool that you'll be using the most. Okay, so moving straight down from there, we have a focus switch right here, and we can put the camcorder into an automatic focus mode or by flipping the switch down into a temporary manual mode. So we can do quite a bit with the camcorder in terms of the different focus systems. Now, straight below that, we've got an automatic focus button. So if you're using manual mode with the camcorder and you need to focus in on something quickly, just simply press this focus button and it will lock its focus in immediately. So it's a great way to work if you prefer to work manually but you need a very fast focus or need an instant focus puller basically, just simply by hitting the switch. Coming straight down, we've got a dial, and this dial can be assigned to do a few different things. I have it set up so that it's controlling my aperture, so I've got a manual focus and I've got a manual aperture control here. So again, it can do multiple things, but if you want it to function like a traditional broadcast lens does, you're going to have this set up so this acting as an aperture or an iris control. Let's step on back just a little bit more. Coming straight back from the knob, we have a switch, and this is an auto manual iris switch. So if you find yourself in a situation where the exposure isn't right and you don't feel comfortable dialing it in, just simply hit the auto iris button, and this will immediately correct for your exposure. So in other words, it will let the camera go into an auto exposure mode. Great way to work when you're working in fast shoot situations and you don't have instant control. Maybe you're busy fumbling around with the focus because you still want manual focus control. Then just simply, again, hit this auto iris button. Coming straight up from there, there's the manual servo button. What this does is it changes the zoom on the camcorder from a servo mode to a manual mode. You'll notice it's fairly difficult for my hand to push this ring when it's in servo mode. It takes quite a bit of pressure to turn it when it's in servo mode. But when we put this in manual mode, it's quite simple to turn. In other words, it's disengaging the gears from the motor that drive the servo. Okay, coming straight up from there, we've got a neutral density filter setting, and there are 3 different neutral density filters that are on here. We've got a 1/4 neutral density filter, a 1/16, and a 1/64. You're going to primarily be using those when you're outdoors, but there are some other times that we might want to be using the neutral density filter when we're indoors. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as we get into some of the tips and tricks that accompany the HMC150 camcorder. So let's step back just a little bit. We've also got some user buttons. These user buttons are assigned to work the way that you want the camera to function, and they're very, very handy. We're going to use the menu settings to set up these different user functions. They're assignable, just like several of the other camcorders that are out there. But we've got a user 1, user 2, and user 3 button that allows us to set the camcorder up the way that we want it to work. Let's keep going down the left-hand side. We've already looked at the iris control. Next we have a gain switch, and the gain switch has 3 different positions. So we can set these gains up for 3 different levels of use. Why would you want this? Well, maybe we don't want the camera automatically controlling our gain. And so what we want to be able to do is control the gain that the camera is inducing. So we can set these up inside different menus to create different settings for each of the 3 gain positions, or low, medium, and high. Coming straight back from that, we have a white balance control. The white balance control functions like any other semi-professional or professional camcorder. We effectively have 3 different white balance settings. We've got a preset setting. That would be letting the camera work with an indoor preset, an outdoor preset, and some different light temperature settings. We've got an A and a B. These are user assignable. And we'll come to the white balance switch a little bit later on. It's around in the front of the camcorder, what you'll find on most professional lens systems. Coming straight back, we have a control here for the focus or exposure ring. So in other words, as we're working with this ring right here, we can control our aperture, or we can set it to the front position and it becomes a focus ring. Now again, if you want this to operate like a traditional broadcast lens, we're going to leave this set to the focus position, and we're going to use this dial as an aperture control. In most professional lenses, what you'll find is you've got a focus control, a zoom control, and then an aperture control in the back. So using this dial here like an aperture control, it makes it a lot more like a professional broadcast setup. Next is the display mode button. Now this should be one of your very best friends. This button is what allows you to look inside the camcorder and see how everything is set up and how everything is operating at a glance. So it's a way of knowing what's going on in the camcorder. If you don't know what the camcorder is doing, maybe you've got overexposure, or maybe you've got some bad audio or something, and you can't exactly tell what's causing it, just simply pressing this status button or this display mode here will display everything on the screen and let you know what's happening inside the camcorder and where all of the different settings may be at. Okay, next, moving straight back, we've got a switch here that puts the camcorder in a full auto or completely manual mode. So if you're in a run and gun scenario and you need to get the camera up and going and you're just booting it up and you need to get that shot, I recommend flipping this into auto mode as opposed to manual mode. That way you know that you'll get very, very close to the shot that you want. It might not be perfect because the camera isn't capable of reading what's in your mind, but until you get familiar with the camera, or if you're in that run and gun scenario, I recommend using this auto mode. Coming straight back from there, we've got a pair of audio controls. Now this allows us to set the levels of the microphones, whether we're using the built-in internal microphone or whether we've got external microphones plugged in. And those are separately controllable. We can use a blend of the internal and the external microphones. We'll come back to how to set that up a little bit later on, but this is what gives us control of those audio levels in this camcorder. All the rest of our controls are going to be found underneath the LCD panel. So we've got quite a number of different controls here, and they're fairly comprehensive. So let's start inside the under panel block. Okay, the first thing that we have is color bars. This allows us to put color bars up on either the screen on the LCD panel or on an external monitor. Now this is really pretty important because it's important that your camcorder be matching what's happening on your external monitor. So color bars are fairly important to be able to match things up. Coming straight back from that, we've got a shutter button. And what this button does is it enables or disables control of the shutter speed. When this is turned off, the camera defaults to the shutter speed for which you have set up the menu for. So in other words, if you're shooting 30p, it's going to set the shutter up to 1/30th or 1/60th of a second, or if you're shooting 60p, it's going to set it up to a 60p setting. If you need faster or slower shutter speeds, you're going to enable this, and we dial those shutter speeds up or down by using the plus or minus keys that we see right here. Okay. Straight below the shutter control and the bar control is the audio sector. Now here's a place where you want to pay specific attention or particular attention, because this is where a lot of people can easily get messed up with this camcorder. If you're using the internal mics, then we're going to be sure that we set these switches to internal. If you're using external mics, we're going to set these up for external, or we might be using internal on one channel and external on another. Either way, this is where we're going to set it up. So here's what we're going to do. Let's just have a quick look here. This first switch here is channel 1 select. This allows us to set it up so that it is set up for an internal microphone. It allows us to set it up so that we're using external input number 1, or we can use it for external input number 2. So even though it's channel 1, that just simply means it's audio channel 1, but we can use an input from the plug that is labeled channel 2. If that doesn't confuse you, wait till we get to channel 2. So we'll flip this back up so that we're using the internal microphone. And here we have channel 2 select. Now we can set this up to use internal, so it's using this microphone at the top. We can set this up so that it's using input number 2. So this channel can't use audio from the input labeled channel 1. It can only use audio from channel 2. So why would that possibly be that way? Well, the reason that it's set up this way is because it's a common practice in the broadcast world to have one microphone feeding 2 channels. And what we do is we set up channel 1 for normal use. In other words, we set it up for normal audio levels. And then we set channel 2 for about 6 dB lower than channel 1. And that's called a safety channel. So what happens there is when somebody speaks loud, or maybe there's a loud sound that occurs nearby, that sound might distort channel 1, and we've got channel 2 that we can use as a fallback or as a safety channel. So that's why we have 3 different inputs on channel 1 and 2 different inputs on channel 2. So moving on farther back, we've got a switch here that allows us to turn on or off phantom power. So if we're using an external microphone, in other words, if we're plugging a microphone into channel 1 or channel 2 input block, and that microphone is a condenser microphone, a microphone that requires external power. It might have a built-in battery, or it might require that the camera power that mic up. Then you're going to turn on the phantom power button. Now, even if your microphone has got a built-in battery, I recommend flipping the phantom power on to power that microphone, because that way we've got a little bit more consistent power source than that 1.5 or 3 volt battery that's built into the microphone. However, if you're using the internal microphone, make sure these are set to off, as that'll extend your battery life by not using the phantom power. So again, external mic, turn phantom power on if it's a condenser. If it's an internal mic, turn phantom power off. That'll extend your battery life. So let's move to the next section of the block. So coming down here, we've got a counter switch. This allows us to turn on the counter in the LCD screen and in the EVF, so we can see what's happening with the time counter. Now, time code is recorded directly to the SDHC card as we're using it, so we don't necessarily need to see it, but this button allows us to turn on or turn off time code. Some people find the time code visuals distracting. Now, this also allows us to switch back and forth between time code and the master time code or the U-bit code. So this is how we're going to control what we view in the LCD monitor. Coming straight back, we've got a reset button. This allows us to reset our time code. So we'll just simply press this to set it up. Next, we have a zebra button. Now the zebra button controls 4 different functions. First of all, it allows us to turn zebra on or off. It allows us to set the zebra to a 100% setting, to an 80% setting, and to a center marker mode. So we can turn a center marker on also using this switch. Now, why would zebra default to 80 or 100%? Well, generally we want to set up our skin tone so that zebra occurs at about 80%. That's a great way to work. So I like leaving the camcorder set to 80% and then using skin tone to determine whether I'm exposing properly or not. And the reason for that is most of us are familiar with what skin tone should look like. We spend all day long looking at other people's faces, so we know what skin tone should look like. And therefore, I expose more for the skin tone than I expose for anything else. Now, if I'm shooting panoramic views or outdoor footage where there aren't people, I'll probably switch this up to 100%, but it really depends on what your workflow is and what you're most comfortable with. But the 80% setting there is designed really to work around skin tones. The center marker just simply gives you a way to know that your subject is in center, and that's the focus of your frame. Not focus in terms of blurry or sharp, but focus in terms of what the frame is actually seeing and what the center point of your frame is. Coming straight back, here we've got an OIS. Now OIS stands for Optical Image Stabilization System. This allows you to turn on or turn off OIS. Why would you want to turn it on or turn it off? Well, if you're shooting on a set of sticks, you're shooting on a tripod, and the tripod is on a fairly stable surface, such as a concrete floor or maybe you're outdoors, you don't need to have the optical image stabilizer turned on, and you'll get a slightly sharper picture by doing this. However, if we're on an unstable surface, for instance, maybe you're still on a tripod, but you're on a set of bleachers where people are walking by and bouncing the bleacher up and down a little bit, you're going to want to turn the optical image stabilization on. And this is going to allow you to stabilize the picture a little bit better. If you're in a fast action sport mode and you're shooting something like motocross, or you're shooting from the back of a motorcycle or horseback or other bumpy situation that's out there, you might want to turn the optical image stabilization off. There might be so much bounce that it will soften up your picture or create some flutter in the picture. And the flutter combined with the high compression ratio of this particular camcorder may not exactly be flattering to your picture. So experiment a little bit before you enable or disable the OIS system. Now again, if you're shooting on a stable platform and you're using sticks, then I recommend that you turn off the OIS. But in most other shooting situations, except for extremely bumpy or jumpy terrain, I would recommend leaving the OIS on. If you're shooting handheld, I especially recommend that you leave the OIS on to get a little smoother picture. Let's step down. Stepping down, we next come to an LCD switch. Now this LCD switch allows us to control the backlight in the LCD viewfinder, and this allows us to adjust it for different lighting conditions. So we've got a backlight control there, and you can do a little bit more with this. We'll come to it when we get to the menu segment of the DVD. Stepping back, we have an EVF detail control, and this is pretty important as we set up our electronic viewfinder and detail so that we can set up our focus. This is a fairly important function. We'll come to that a little bit later on. The next button, stepping to the back, is the WFM or waveform monitor button. This is a great way to set up a waveform monitor inside of your LCD panel so that you can see what's exceeding exposure or what isn't. Now, it only shows up in the LCD panel. It does not show up in the electronic viewfinder. So if you've got somebody else that's monitoring the camcorder, this is a great way to set the LCD panel off to the side and let someone else monitor it from the outside while you're focusing on the shot in the electronic viewfinder or on an external monitor. So that gets us through all of the under panel controls on the 150 camcorder. Next, we're going to step up to the next set of controls that are just above that on the 150, and this is where we're going to control all of our different menu settings and set up the camcorder the way that we want it to function. Let's dig in. Okay, so moving up to this upper section up here, first of all, the most important button is the menu button. And clicking this opens up our menus in the LCD panel on an external monitor and also inside of our electronic viewfinder. So it shows up everywhere. And it lets us see exactly what's happening or what our settings in the camcorder are. There's several different menu functions, and we'll get into those in another section of this DVD. This is where you enable and disable the menu functions. To scroll through the different menu functions, we have a little joystick here, and these joystick buttons allow us to click up and click down to get us to the various menu points. By depressing the center point of the joystick, it acts like an execute function or an execute button. So we have a couple of different ways we can navigate through the menu and select that particular task or that particular function and choice simply by clicking on the center of the joystick or by clicking the execute button that we find up here. Then coming straight down, we've got a plus and minus button. The plus and minus keys that we see here allow us to adjust the different values of each of the different parameter settings. Now again, we can also set up those parameters by using the joystick. So these two buttons are just really there as a second way to manipulate or maneuver your way through the menus. Now this gets us through all of the left-hand side of the camcorder. So let's turn the camcorder around and we'll have a look at the back side. On the back of the camcorder, you're going to find a bunch of different features that you'll be using fairly often. So just because they're on the back doesn't mean that they're relegated to an area of unimportance. So we're going to start off in the upper left-hand corner. This rotary dial that you see here, this allows us to set up scene files. In other words, we can store and recall different camera looks. For example, maybe you want a cinematic look. Maybe you want a different cinematic look, or maybe you want to stretch the blacks, or you want to push the saturation, or maybe you want to decrease saturation. There's several things that we can do with our scene files, and we set those up in the menu. And we'll get into the menus a little bit later on. That's going to comprise a fairly large portion of this DVD, but this is where we can instantly recall or change our settings. So perhaps we've got one setting for indoors. Maybe you're shooting a wedding and you're indoors in a church, but you're going to be going to the outdoors and you want to be able to immediately switch from an indoor setting to an outdoor setting. This is the scene file or the switch that you're going to use to enable us to do that. Coming straight down, we see the standby switch. Now the standby switch is your best friend. Get used to it. All of the different file-based camcorders that are out there take a little bit of time to boot up. Essentially, they're just computers, and they take some time. Well, the problem is if you're in a fast action shooting mode and you need to be able to get that camcorder on and get the shot, simply turning it on and off isn't going to be fast enough. So by using the standby mode, what that does is it puts the camera into a sleep mode. So when you turn the switch that's on the right-hand side of the camcorder to power it down, instead of going into a full power down, it just puts it into standby mode. That means it's instantly ready to go when you flip that power switch back up. I've already once been in a situation where I needed the camcorder for a fast action critical shot, and I missed it because instead of it being in the standby mode, I had to turn the camcorder on, and the couple of minutes that it took to boot up the camcorder cost me my shot. So get used to using this standby mode. When you click this switch, it does put a standby indicator in the LCD panel, so you'll see that you're in standby mode. Just simply hold the button down for a couple of seconds and you'll see that indicator light up inside your viewfinder and in the LCD panel. Coming straight down from there, our next button that we have right there is mode, and this allows us to determine whether the camera is in playback mode or whether it's in record mode. So in other words, is this a deck or is it a camcorder? It allows us to switch back and forth by using this mode button. And the last thing we see here is a little red panel. This is where the infrared remote reads in. So if you're using the remote, make sure you don't block this panel off. One small tip, if you're using this camcorder with other camcorders and there are other IRs that are in the area for this same model, tape this over if you don't want this to be one of the camcorders controlled, or you can go to the menu and turn off the remote function. Either way, it works the same. Next, underneath this rubber panel, we have several different connectors. So as we pull this down, the first thing we see on the top is a USB connector, and this is a standard USB mini. It's a great way to transfer media to and from your camcorder over to your computer. On the other hand, you can do it much faster generally using a card reader, depending on the computer system that you're using. Coming straight down from there, we have a full-size HDMI connector. This is great. A full-size HDMI connector is a fantastic way to plug this into an external monitor. In fact, you can feed a video farm if you need to by going into an HDMI splitter and splitting the signal from the camcorder out into multiple monitors. So it's a great way to be able to work. Or you could also use this as a live capture device into a hardware card such as a Blackmagic Design Intensity or something along those lines. Okay, moving straight down from there. This is a component output. This allows us to output red, green, or blue over cable into a television monitor, so it effectively functions the same way. Coming up here to the top is our headphone out. It's a little bit of an inconvenient place to have the headphone out, but you should be monitoring your audio anytime you're recording anything. You certainly wouldn't walk onto a shoot and just simply point the camera without looking at the viewfinder any more than you really should be using microphones into the camcorder without listening in headphones. So even though it's a little inconvenient, it is placed there. If you want to use this a lot, but you don't want to have to open up this rubber panel, it's no big deal to take a hole punch and just simply punch right through this rubber protector. That is going to remove some of your elemental protection, but bear in mind you're going to be plugging a headphone jack through this rubber connector here. Okay, coming straight down from there, this is a remote command center, and you can purchase an optional remote control that will allow us to control the zoom, start, stop, and other functions of the camcorder directly through these two controls here. Very similar to a length control on some of the other camcorders that are out there, but it does allow us to have remote on the camcorder. Our next control is not really so much on the back of the camcorder as it is the right-hand side of the camcorder, but this is our on-off switch and our stop-start record button. Fairly self-explanatory. Because I currently have the camcorder in standby mode as indicated in the LCD panel, when I turn this off, the camcorder is now in standby as opposed to being in an on-off mode. So we'll turn that back on. You can see that we have an instant on in our picture there. Now there's one last segment to the rear side that we want to look at, and that's right here under this door. And you can see here that we've got a green light under this little door. So let's click on the side and open this door up. This is where our SDHC card is stored. Now it's really important that you never pull this card out when that light is not green. If you pull this card out while the light is flashing or while it's red, that means that the system is either writing or there may be a problem with the card. But if you remove the card while that is not green, you run a very high chance of corrupting the data that's on the card. So be real cautious with this, and this goes for any file-based camcorder. If you see a red light in the card indicator, don't pull the card out. To pull the card out, all you need to do is simply press in, and the card will automatically eject itself. That's all there is to it. Click that back up. We've got a nice window here that allows us to see what card we're working with. Now, one thing you may consider doing is using different color cards, or using cards that are all the same size in one color and cards of a different size in another color. And you can always see which cards you're using in the back of the viewfinder. You can also paint the cards using magic markers or maybe fingernail polish or something like that, so you can see which card you're using. So that gets us through the back end of the 150 camcorder. Coming from the front toward the back, we've got a built-in microphone. So with the internal microphone, we've got right-left pickup, not anything particularly special there. I don't recommend using the on-camera microphone in most situations unless you're doing run and gun and you're just simply using this as natural audio. It's an okay microphone, certainly not the best, certainly not the worst. Up above that, we've got a cold shoe. This is just a great place to put a light or another microphone mount. And of course, the camcorder does come with an external microphone mount that you can screw on or screw off. Stepping back, we have a record button. This mimics the thumb record button that we saw on the right-hand side of the camcorder, the start-stop button. Now we can enable or disable this record button with a small switch that we see right here. It says off and on. It's kind of a recessed switch so that we don't bump it out of the way. Stepping back, this is a zoom controller, another rocker zoom that allows us to control the zoom function on the camcorder. So that allows us to servo control the zoom on the camcorder. If we've got the camcorder in manual mode, this rocker switch doesn't function. Okay, stepping back from there, we've got a boom mount. This allows us to mount the camcorder to a crane or to some other type of dolly or handheld mount where we might want to doggy shoot, or we're going to drop the camera all the way down to the ground. So we've just got a threaded input here. Directly below the threaded input is a handle zoom switch. This allows us to control the speed of the zoom controller, the rocker control on the handle zoom. So we can set this to position 1, 2, or 3, and that allows us to have reasonably fast or faster or very fast zooms. Just depends on which setting that you've got it set up to. Okay, coming straight back, we're going to look real quickly at the electronic viewfinder. Here we've got a focus ring. Now the focus ring is just simply there to change the focus in the eyepiece. It doesn't have anything to do with what the camera is seeing in or out of focus. So if you shoot with glasses, for instance, you might want to set this up for your eye. It's really dependent on how you work. Now the best way to set this up is to put the lens cap on, turn on the menus, and adjust this focus so that the menus are in focus. Pretty easy way to work with the camcorder. Okay, so that gets us through all of the top section of the camcorder. We're very quickly going to look at the top section on the right-hand side. So we've already looked at the thumb switch that's on the back of the right-hand side. Well, just above that, we have a rocker control. And this, again, controls the zoom function. If we've got the zoom function in manual mode, this rocker control is completely disabled. Pulling it back is a wide angle. Pushing it forward is telephoto, just like any other camera that's out there. Next, we've got a hidden function up here. It's underneath this rubber panel. This gives us SD output, so we can output a composite signal. That's the yellow output, and then we have audio coming out right and left. So if you need to plug this into an SD monitor and need to get it going quickly, this is exactly where you're going to do that. And we'll just close that over. And next, we've got a couple of audio inputs. We have channel 2 and channel 1 here. Channel 1 and channel 2 are both adjustable for line or mic input into the camcorder. If you're not using these, I recommend that you use the supplied rubber boot to keep these covered over, because it's very easy for dirt and moisture to get into your camcorder via these plugs. So close those over so they don't corrode or so they don't get moisture or dirt or anything else inside the camcorder. Next, we're going to have a quick look at the front end of the camcorder. There's not a whole lot on the front of the camcorder. Now, we're going to remove the lens hood so that you can more easily see what's going on. Remember, you might want to put some small gaffer's tape or a small bit of tape on the inside of this hood, because it doesn't lock into place once you've removed that hood several times. It tends to break down the plastic and weaken it. So all we really have here to know about is, first of all, we have a line or mic switch. This allows us to adjust the input for channel 1 and channel 2 from line or mic. If you've got a microphone plugged in, we're going to put this in mic mode. If we've got a line plugged in other words, maybe we're coming off a DJ board or off of a sound system in a church or a school or something like that, we're going to flip this down to line mode. So we'll control the inputs of channel 1 and channel 2. We can set it up so that they're independent of each other and have a mic in one channel and a line in the other, if that's the way you want to work. So just be aware of as you're plugging back and forth between the DJ and so forth. Next thing that we see is the AWB, or the automatic white balance switch that's on the front of the camcorder. So all we're going to do is put a piece of white in front of our scene, hit the automatic white balance button, and it's automatically going to set that up to the color temperature that you're shooting in. It's going to white balance the camcorder. Be sure to white balance. A lot of people forget about that. So next, we're going to get into some of the menus and other functions of the HMC150 camcorder. There's a lot going on inside the menus of this camcorder. In fact, that's really what makes the camcorder what it is in terms of quality, is how you set up the different features and functions in the menus. So these are going to take a little while. I recommend that you grab your camcorder and you sit down and go through the menus with me so that you'll get a little more familiar with how the controls work and how the navigation works. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to do is press the menu select switch, and that's right here as we saw before in the upper part of the camcorder. So you can see here it opens up to the camera menu, and we've got several different modes. We're going to first click on the scene file. So using the jog toggle or the joystick that we find on the camera here, let's just click the joystick, and we're going to scroll all the way back to the very first menu. So just go up all the way through, and the first item in the menu is the card read and write. So in this mode, this is where it's going to set up our card read write modes. We can set that up to write, read, or no. We're just going to leave that set to no. Okay, we can load and save information on the initialize. That really is up to you. I'm going to leave this set to no for now. Synchro scan. What the synchro scan does is it sets it up so that we're shooting a computer monitor or other type of an older CRT monitor. What this does is set it up so that the scan lines on the TV line up with the speed of the camcorder itself. So currently we're at 1/48. Just press the button here and we can switch this up or down. So a couple switches. We'll switch it up, slide it down, and reset this right at 1/48 here. So the reason that this is adjustable is because different computer monitors or different monitors may have different scan rates, and this allows us to exactly fine-tune it. Pressing in on the joystick again executes that particular function, and then clicking the back button takes us back to our menu. The next option is detail level. Now, we're already shooting in HD, and it's really tempting for a lot of people to try and increase the sharpness or the detail level of the picture. Don't do it. If you do, what's going to happen is you're going to make more noise apparent in the picture. Now, we're already using a high compression format, and it doesn't deal with noise very well. So all you're going to do if you increase this is create some problems for yourself in post. It'll create some noisier image in post. And in fact, with most of the prosumer HD camcorders, I recommend that you turn the detailing down just a little bit. Your mileage may vary. Be sure that you're checking this with an external monitor, and even record some shots in some different conditions, because this particular function can create some definite problems for you. Make sure that you're using an external monitor to check everything that's going on in the camcorder all the time. That's the only way you're going to know what these different menu functions are actually doing to your picture. You can't see very clearly in the LCD monitor or in the electronic viewfinder what's going on. It's just simply too small. So you're better off if you've got some kind of an external monitor. Panasonic makes some fantastic external monitors, but you can use just about any kind of an HDMI input monitor to check out what's going on in these menu controls. So in fact, if you've got an HDMI monitor that you can plug your camcorder into right now, it's a good time to do it. Let's move on. So if we do want to adjust that detail level, again, simply press in on the joystick, press in again on the joystick, and here we can raise or lower the detail level. Now we can see as I'm cranking that up or down in the LCD monitor, you can't really see a lot of change. It's just because, again, that's just too small of a monitor. I'm going to go ahead and set my detail level down just a little bit. We'll set that to -2. Click the joystick again and click the back arrow, and we're great. Now click down, go to the vertical detail level. This allows us to adjust vertical detail. And again, just like we saw in the overall detail or the master detail level, you probably don't want to increase this very much, if at all. So we're going to go back and press the down on the joystick again, and detail coring. The same thing. This allows us, in the detail coring, it allows us to go in and control the type of detail that we're adding to the image. So we can really put some fine detail in. Again, this will raise the noise apparency. Anytime you raise any of the detail controls on just about any camcorder, you will likely find yourself inducing noise. It might be chroma noise, or it might be just added noise overall. So be cautious with this, and again, check your shots on an external monitor so that you know exactly what's going on. Okay, so we'll click the execute button or press in the joystick, and again go down to our chroma level. Now this allows us to adjust the level of color in our shot. So if we reduce the color, you can see the red roses and so forth diminish in color. If we take it all the way up, we can really make those colors blast out. It's very easy to take them beyond the norm. So be cautious about how you're using this control. Again, I can't reiterate enough, using an external monitor via HDMI or via SDI or via even the composite output, just on a larger picture to see exactly what's going on. HDMI is going to give you your best source if you can use that particular control. All right, so we're going to set our color, and for this particular look, I'm going to set that to -2. Okay, now we'll click the back again, drop down to chroma phase, and this allows us to swing the phase of that chroma control. So we'll select that and swing it up or down. If you look real closely in the viewfinder there, you can see the color shifting to warmer or cooler tones. Let's click the execute. Now, if you don't want to click the joystick for execute, you can also click the execute button on the side of the camcorder if you wish. We'll click back, go down to color temperature A channel. And what this does is it adjusts the color temperature of the A preset after the white balance. And the same thing occurs for the color B channel. So we can swing the color temperature up or down after the white balance has occurred. So again, external monitor to see exactly what's going on here. Here we're just going to go ahead and back out of that and down to color temperature B, and that's exactly the same thing. Now, although the menu appears to end here, go ahead and click the down select on the joystick again, and this takes us into the next menu. Now, this is our master pedestal setup. This allows us to swing the master pedestal up or down, so we can expand our blacks or increase the dynamic range here. You can see the color starts to get a little bit washed out as we swing that up or down. So being able to swing that master pedestal up or down is very beneficial to bring our blacks into order. Click the center of the joystick to execute and click the back button. Go down to our auto iris level. Now this allows us to control how far the auto iris level swings. So this is a great way to work if you're going to be moving from indoor outdoor scenes or moving into multiple scenes that are lit differently without turning on or off the camera. You can set it up so that the camera can only push the auto iris so far, and that's what we're going to do here. So again, click the execute button and allows us to swing that auto iris up or down. So we're going to leave this set to 0. Execute, go back. Next is our DRS mode, or the dynamic range stretch mode. Now what this does is it allows us to compensate for images where normal shooting will result in overexposure. So we've got some settings here. Now note that currently it's grayed out. That's because we're shooting in a mode other than 60i or 60p. You have to be in one of those two modes if we're going to be using this particular shooting format. So if you're shooting 24p, for instance, you don't have access to this particular mode. Okay. So we'll slide down from there. Now, we'll come back to the DRS a little bit later on. Next, we're going to go down to gamma. Now, there are several different gamma modes that are available for this camera. We can set up gammas for normal HD shooting, or we can set up cine-like gammas so that it's a little bit more like film. There's a number of different choices that we have here. And as we scroll through them, look at the reds and the white background, and you'll get an idea of what these different modes are shooting. Now, by the same token, again, external monitor. Get familiar with these modes using an external monitor so that you have the best idea of exactly what's going on. So currently we're in HD normal. We'll slide down to low, SD normal, high, black press, Cine-like D. So we'll go ahead and hit Cine-like D, and that's going to be our mode. Next up is our knee control. Now currently it's grayed out. Why? The reason it's grayed out is because we just got through setting the gamma to cine-like. So let's go back up to our gamma, and we're going to reset that so that it's not in cine-like and go back to HD norm. Great. Now come down to our knee, and you'll notice we have several different adjustments here. High, medium, low, and auto. Basically what this does is it compensates for overexposure in various settings where we're using automatic settings. It will compress, or it will swing the dynamic range down or compress the dynamic range at various speeds or at various amounts. So we can use an auto mode. We can adjust it so that it's in high mode, and that significantly compresses the image, or mid mode, which doesn't quite compress as much, or low mode, which just really barely compresses that dynamic range. Now it looks like we're at the end of the menu again, so we'll click the, first of all, let's set this to low. Let's click our menu next. We have another menu here. You'll notice the first one is matrix. Let's click this to execute. Now we've got a normal shooting mode 1, normal shooting mode 2, and look at the red in those flowers changing in the background. You can see they're very intense in normal 1, they're muted in normal 2. Fluorescent is for shooting in fluorescent lit scenes, and then finally cine-like, which is a much warmer tone. So you can see what's happening in the various matrices there. We're going to leave that in cine-like because it's a very nice look. Skin tone detail. We can turn this on or off. I'm going to leave it on. Now, skin tone detail is very important when we're shooting HD. What skin tone detail does is it looks at the colors of the skin, and it looks at the irregularities, or it looks at the changes in the shadowing in the skin, and it can soften those things up. Why would that be important? Maybe you've got somebody with some acne scarring, or maybe they've got large pores on their face. Well, we really don't want to display that in all its glory. We might want to soften that skin down. And in fact, here you see a very extreme detail, a very extreme demonstration of what skin tone detail reduction does. And so on one side you can see that it's very, very sharp, and there's a lot of detail there that we probably don't want. And on the other side it's very, very soft. This is the skin tone detail setting in the on position. Okay, so we're going to leave that on. Slide down to name edit. Okay. This allows us to change the name that's going on the clip, and I've got these set up with my initials. So that gets us pretty well through the entire setup menu that we've got there, but it's very quick to set these. Just click on a letter and slide it up and down. We're going to save the name change, and there we go. That gets us through the very first menu in the HMC150. Let's continue. after the scene file modes, we're going to look at the switch modes. Now what the switch modes do is they allow us to set up the various switches on the side of the 150 to function the way we'd like them to function. And this is a place where you're going to want to spend some time personalizing the camera and getting it to be exactly what you want it to be, or making it operate more like other cameras you've worked with in the past. If this is your first camera or semi-professional camera, I recommend that you take some time and sit down and think about what you actually want each switch to do, because it's easy to assign functions to switches that you may never use and find yourself in the field wishing that you had assigned the switches differently. So just take a little bit of time, think about what you're doing, and of course you can always go back and change it later on. So let's dig into the switch modes. So if your menu button has not been depressed so that you can see that mode, go ahead and press the menu button again. Using the joystick, scroll down to the switch mode menu, execute by pressing in on the joystick. And the first thing that we see is mid-gain. What this allows us to do is set the gain of the gain switch at the mid-level. So for instance, currently it's set up to be 6 dB. We might change that so that mid-gain is only 3 dB. I really recommend that you set it at 6. 6 dB is a fairly standard mid-gain setting. Of course, you could put it at 3 to get just a tiny little boost, but I recommend that you consider setting this to 6 dB. Of course, again, it's a personal preference. And in fact, if you never want the gain switch to do anything, you can set it up to be 0 dB. So we're going to set this to 6 by pressing in on the execute, press the back button, and drop it down to high gain. Now the high gain is defaulted to 12 dB. I recommend you change this. My personal opinion is that the 150 never be used in 12 dB of gain at all, ever. It's a very noisy image, and from my personal perspective, it makes it all but unusable. And this holds true for just about any of the small format high definition camcorders. There are one or two exceptions, but this isn't one of them. So I recommend not setting this any higher than 9 dB. So we're going to go ahead and set this down to 9 dB, execute, and down to our auto white tracking. Okay, now we can set this for the off position, the preset position, B channel, or A channel. In other words, it's going to set up the auto white tracking depending on where the switch on the side of the camcorder is placed. So if we're using the A channel or the B channel, or if we're using the preset button, then it will activate the auto white tracking. Personal opinion injected here, I recommend you never use auto white tracking, because what can happen is your exposure will bloom and fail, or bloom and then come into proper look. And really it's a better idea to just simply have your lighting be constant and have you controlling it via the iris or auto iris, as opposed to doing anything with the auto white tracking. You can really create some problems. One great example is you might find yourself under fluorescent lights, perhaps a school gymnasium or a church that's got older fluorescents, and the ballasts aren't properly balanced. You'll see that the white will pulse in your image, and this can really be a problem. But if you've got the camera set up to a constant, it's very easy to color correct it later in post. So that's just one example of why you wouldn't want to use the auto white tracking. Now there are times you may want to use it, but for the most part, I'd recommend you avoid it. So we're going to get ahead and leave this set to off. Next, we have a handle zoom option. What this does is it allows us to assign speeds. Remember when we did the quick run through the camcorder, and on the top of the camcorder we saw the speed controls. There's a 1, 2, and a 3. Well, we can assign various speeds to each one of those settings, and this is where we do it. So in our low mode, we can set this to be off or high, etc. So we can set it to low, high, or medium here. We're going to leave that one set just like it is. Okay, next we're going to go down to our iris dial. Now the iris dial is this small dial that we found on the front of the camcorder the first time we went around. This allows us to open or close the iris. Now generally it's as you rotate the dial to the right, this closes down the iris, and as you rotate to the left, it opens up the iris. But each camera may be set up a little bit differently, or you may have your own personal preference. For instance, if you want to close the iris as you scroll downwards or to the left, that's great. Then you'll set this up so that down means closed and up means open. Either way, again, it's a personal preference. So we're going to set this up so that up is open and down is closed, just like that. Press the down arrow on your joystick again, and you come to user number 1. Now, up on the front of the camcorder, about the middle, we've got a user 1 button. We can make this button do most anything that we want it to do. Currently, it's set to white fade by default, but we can go in here and adjust it so that we can turn on the auto tracking, or we can lock the auto tracking. Maybe we want to fade to black or a fade to white. Or maybe we've got a backlit image. So in other words, we're shooting something where the sun is behind our subject. This will sort of help pull our subject back out of that backlit image, or pull our subject from that backlit image. We might be working in a spotlight situation where we've got something in the center of the frame, or something that is spotlit on a stage, and we need to bring up the other things that are around it instead of overexposing for that spotlit image. So that's another function that can be assigned. There are quite a few things that we can assign. We can assign it to give us 18 dB worth of gain, or a super gain, or hyper gain as it's called in some cameras. Again, I recommend you not use this unless you're going for a specific type of a look. Like maybe you're looking for a sort of a night vision look, or surveillance cam look, where it's very dirty, very grainy. You can toss some green over it in post and it'll give it that surveillance cam image. But overall, the image is not useful for most functions. It's just there in case you've got to really extract something out of a poorly lit area. Again, most of the small format HD cams don't do better once they've crossed that 9 dB line. The noise just becomes so eminent or so overpowering that it doesn't work so well. But we can assign that there. Next thing we can do is assign a digital zoom. Now, I'm not a fan of digital zoom, because what digital zoom does is it gives us an artificial zoom by doubling up pixels. If you've really got to reach out there and grab a picture, that's great, but you're a whole lot better off using a telephoto adapter screwed onto the front of the camcorder and getting your zoom through glass, as opposed to trying to do it through digital zoom. So bear in mind that digital zoom can really create some problems in pixelation depending on what all you're doing with it. I recommend you not use it, but this is a feature that you'll find on just about every camcorder that's out there. So it is here if you'd like to use it. Now that said, if you're shooting video just for small format on the web with the 150, by all means feel comfortable using the digital zoom, and by the time you get it compressed down to a size for the web, most of that pixelation that you're noticing in high definition will have gone away and cleaned itself up just a little bit. Adding just a tiny bit of Gaussian blur, about 0.01 or a very tiny amount of Gaussian blur, can also help deal with some of the pixelization or the pixelation that occurs when using digital zooms. So we're going to turn that off, and we're going to go back and look what else there's here. We can insert an index marker, a shot marker, or have it return to the last clip. This is a great way to do a last scene review. So if you want to see what you just recorded, we can set this up for the last clip. So let's go ahead and set this up for the way that I want it to function. I want this to work as a backlight function, because oftentimes I'm swinging the camera through sunlight where there's sun that's behind my subject. So I've got this now set up so that it functions as a backlight. Okay, next, we can scroll down to user 2. We can set this up again the same way. I'm going to do just the opposite and set that up for spotlight for my own personal preferences. And then finally for user 3, I'm going to leave it set to the default mode of index. I really like being able to insert a shot index marker there, or shot index there. So it's a great way to create that thumbnail. Next, we're going to go to focus assist. Now the focus assist is pretty important. What the focus assist does is when we press the focus assist button, it opens up one of two tools that we can use to help us with our focusing. Focus in HD is critical. And so what the focus assist does is it gives us a double-sized image so that we can use that to really tighten in on our image. Now there's other things that can happen here though too. We can also open up a graph in a focus assist mode. We'll look at that in just a second here, but we can also have both functioning. So let's go ahead and set this down to both. I really do like working with both. Some people may or may not like the graph. And let's just go ahead and get out of the menu for just a moment, and we'll come up and hit the focus assist switch. You can see how that zooms in there. Now what we're looking for is we're looking for the graph that we see here to move just a little bit to the right as we start pulling our focus in. So now we're really out of focus. You see as we start to lock into focus, it moves more to the right. Now we're moving back to a blur, and it's moving farther to the left. So we can really tighten that up, and right there we've got a nice sharp focus happening with this camcorder. And you can see exactly what's going on right here with the way that that graph is functioning. Very, very overall nice looking image. Okay, so let's turn the focus assist back off, and we'll go back to our menu. Next is our waveform monitor. The waveform monitor is another real handy tool for checking out exposures, and we can set it up so it's a waveform monitor or a waveform monitor and a vector scope. So if you're familiar with how to look at these to check your exposure and check your color, this is another really great feature that we can bring to the camcorder. So I've got it set up so it's a waveform monitor and a vector scope. Let's just go ahead and shut our menu down really quickly here and turn on our waveform monitor. There we go. So we can see what's happening with our exposure right there, and as we adjust the exposure up or down, we can watch our clip limits change. There you go, we can see that bringing into play. Now if we see something going into an overexposed mode and then bouncing back down, so in other words, if we see an image that's overexposed and then it bounces itself back down, you might want to go in and check and make sure that you don't have any auto exposure settings set up on the camcorder. That's one of the indicators that you've got some auto exposure things going on. And there's our vector scope, and we can see what's happening in terms of our color, and that's skewed very heavily over to the blue. So if we were to change that color out, we'll be able to see that color change immediately. Now that we've re-white balanced our image, let's go ahead and shut the waveform monitor and vector scope off, and we'll go back to our menu. Let's scroll down to our next menu option, the LCD panel, and this allows us a couple of options. Now by default it's set to LCD brightness level. On the side of the camcorder, you remember during the quick tour that we looked at the LCD button that's on the side of the camcorder. This button can serve two different functions. If we press it and want the image to reverse, then we can press it and have the image reverse so that we can do self-portrait work and so on and so forth. Or we can have it function as an LCD brightness level. And the default is LCD brightness level, and that's what we've got ours set up to. So if you watch here as I hit the LCD button, we're changing the brightness level, as you can see here. Or we can set it up for reverse mode. So let's set that up for reverse. And get over our menu and hit that button. And now we have a reversed image. So it's great for doing self-portrait work if that's what you need to do. We'll go back into our menu here and change that so that it's back to the brightness level. And that gets us through all the different switches that are found in the HMC150. Now again, sit down, spend a little bit of time, figure out what you want each switch to do. You might want them to do absolutely nothing, so you don't have to worry about bumping anything. It's a matter of personal preference. The next menu setting that we're going to look at is the auto switch. Now, what this is for is it allows the camera to either take over everything or only take over partial function of the camcorder when you put the camcorder in auto mode. Remember down here on the bottom of the camcorder we have the auto switch taking it out of manual mode into auto mode. Well, we can determine which things are controlled by that auto mode. For instance, by default from the factory, when you put the camera into auto mode, everything goes auto. Your focus switch goes away, your gain switches go away, and so forth. Well, we can control whether those functions work when we're in auto mode. So for instance, maybe you go into auto mode but you want manual control over your iris, or you want manual control over your gain. We can set this up so that you can control certain parameters of the camera even though you're in a fully auto mode. Let's look at how that works. So we're going to slide down to our auto switch mode here, and first we have the auto iris. You'll notice that that is set to the on mode. So now when we put the camcorder in auto mode, we no longer have control of the iris on the underside of the camera. This function is now disabled. Well, I happen to like having an auto iris, but I might want to be able to flip my camcorder into the full auto mode really quickly. I might need gain, or I might need focus, or I want everything just to set up automatically. So you may or may not want to have this enabled. Just like everything else, click the execute in the middle of the joystick, switch down to off. Now when we put the camcorder in auto mode, we have manual control over our auto iris. I'm going to take that back and leave it set to factory default. Next is our automatic gain control. We can determine whether the AGC comes into 6 dB or 12 dB or does absolutely nothing when we go into auto mode. I recommend that you leave this set to the factory default of 6 dB. Your mileage may vary. You also may want to switch this to the off position so that the auto mode never changes your gain. When you set this into off mode, what it means is that you are responsible for adjusting your gain. So you're going to be putting it at 0 dB or using the two switch settings that you set up earlier when we were working with the various switch setups. Okay, sliding down, our auto tracking Well, remember earlier I mentioned we don't really want to deal with auto tracking with any kind of camcorder. Auto white balances, auto tracking whites, let's leave these turned off. So I recommend that you shut this off and not allow the camcorder to set up for auto tracking whites. So we're going to put this in the off mode, and now even when we're in full auto mode, it's going to take the camcorder and not control or not auto track the whites. So again, personal preference, but I'm really not a fan of auto white balance or auto tracking white systems on any kind of a camcorder. It can really mess you up in certain circumstances, and it's difficult to correct for in post, especially if it ends up being a pulsing kind of a white or a changing kind of a white. I'll give you one other example of where you might run into some of these problems. One time we were shooting in a warehouse building, and as they were pulling trucks around the building, we kept seeing the windows being blocked by the various trailers as they went past the window, and it was causing things to constantly bloom and expand. So this is one place again where you definitely don't want to have any kind of an auto white system taking place. So again, shut that off. Moving down next, you have autofocus mode. Do we want autofocus to be enabled or not? And this gets us through all four of the different auto modes in the camcorder. Again, this is something you want to think about a little bit, because chances are you're not going to be setting these very often. Once you set them up, they're probably going to become your personal preference, and they're going to work the way you want it to work. Let's move on. Next up is the record menu. And so we're going to set up the camera for the type of recording that we'd like to do. So let's go ahead and dig in. We'll click back out of our menu here, recording setup. Okay, first of all, we're going to set up the record mode of the camcorder, and there are several different modes. So we're going to execute. You'll notice here we've got lots and lots of different modes. Here we shoot the low bitrate HE 1080 60i, fairly low bitrate 1080 60i, a little faster 1080 60i. Next up, we come to a high quality 720 24p, a high quality 720 30p, and my favorite, high quality 720 60p. This is great for creating beautiful slow motion shots. You can really cram the information down in here if you're looking at beautiful slow-mo or you need really nice slow motion. Okay, moving up, we've got 1080 24p, 1080 30p, and 1080 60i. Now, if you're interfacing this camera with HDV camcorders or most of the other high-def camcorders that are out there, you're probably going to want to shoot in 60i or maybe in 30p. Either way, this is where you're going to set that menu choice. So we're going to set this up so that we're shooting in 1080 30p, and you'll notice that when you do this, the screen will blink off just a little bit. That's because the camera actually needs to reset itself. So nothing's happened, nothing's wrong when you see that screen blank out for a second. All it's doing is resetting its internal clock to the type of shooting that you've determined that you want to shoot with. Okay. Next, we're going to go into pre-record mode. I'm going to turn this to on. What pre-record mode does is it allows the camera to shoot for 3 seconds before you ever hit the record button. So for instance, if you see a scene happening and you can get the camera up, but you can't press the record button fast enough, don't worry about it. The camera is already recording 3 seconds in advance if you've got this enabled. So in my mind, there's really no downside to having the pre-record mode enabled. Just keep in mind that you've got 3 seconds of pre-roll before you've hit the record button. And so when you do hit that record button and you wonder why you've got a couple of extra seconds ahead of that moment, now you know why. So my personal preference is to leave this enabled. Next, the timestamp option. Now, what the timestamp option does is it superimposes or overlays time and date information on the image. I personally don't like doing this, but maybe you're doing some type of legal work or some type of forensic work where you need to document time and date, or maybe you've got a competition or something like that. Then, of course, you're going to want that time and date overlaid or superimposed on top of the image. I'm going to leave this set to off. Okay, next we have a mic automatic level control. Now, if you're a conscientious videographer and you're always monitoring with headphones, go ahead and turn on the automatic level control. I recommend you not use it. What it will do is it will compress the dynamic range. It will take quiet sounds and try to raise them up, and it'll take loud sounds and try to squish them down. So in this particular mode, you may find yourself raising room noise or computer noise or other noises in the room when you're using the automatic level control, or basically it's like an automatic gain control. So I'd recommend that you leave this shut off. Next down is mic gain, and we've got two different mic gains. Well, what these do is when we're using an external microphone, it allows us to adjust the gain input level of the different types of microphones. If you're using a microphone that doesn't have a real hot output, go ahead and set this up so it's at minus 50 dB. But if you're using a real hot output microphone, some of the shotguns and some of the different condenser mics that are out there are very, very high output, and they have a lot of voltage on the output side. You might want to set this to minus 60 dB. The best way to figure out how this works is plug your microphone in, put your volume levels to 5, and give it a normal type of a volume input, and watch what happens with your meters. Then set this back to minus 50 dB and see what happens in that situation. Really what we want to do is be able to record the hottest signal without clipping. So in other words, we want our volume meters going as far across the screen as they can without hitting that very end point. Don't worry about whether you're recording at minus 20 or minus 12 or minus 6 dB, because the meters on this camcorder don't really allow for that. What you want to do is simply worry about getting the hottest possible signal you can without ever hitting the very top end. So if you're working with normal inputs and you think you're going to maybe run into some slightly louder sounds than what you're recording on a normal input, go ahead and back your level off a little bit, or you can set this down to the 10 dB value. It's really dependent on what you want to do. We can set this up for both microphones, so mic gain 1 and mic gain 2. And that gets us through all of the different recording setup options that are available inside the 150 camcorder. Next, let's dive into the timecode menu functions. So we're going to click back here and drop down to TC and U-bit setup. Okay, first we have the ability to set up our timecode mode to be drop frame or non-drop frame, and by default it's set up to non-drop frame. Next, we've got a timecode generator mode. Now, this is currently set to free run. There are two different modes that we can use with the camcorder. We can use free run, and that means that timecode is always running, whether the camcorder is recording or not. The second you turn it on, timecode starts. But as soon as we put it into the rec run mode or record run mode, that's when timecode starts and stops based on when we hit the start stop button. Now, if it is that your TGC setup is locked into free run and it's grayed out, that's because you've got pre-roll recording on. Remember when we were looking at setups a little bit earlier, it was set up so that we turned on the pre-rec. In other words, it's rolling 3 seconds before we start to record. Anytime you put your camcorder in pre-rec mode, or you're doing that 3-second pre-record or that record buffer, it automatically will set your camcorder into free run timecode mode. So if you don't want free run, make sure you turn off the pre-rec run mode. Let's move on. Next, we come down to our timecode preset. This allows us to use a preset timecode. So if we're using a preset timecode that we're importing, or we want to start with a preset timecode from another point, then we're going to choose yes. We'll leave this set to no. And the same thing with the U-bit preset. We can turn this to yes or no based on the way that we want to work with it. Okay. Now finally, we're going to slide down to external timecode link here. And this gives us 3 different modes. We can set this up so that we can start initial timecode from the exact same point if we've got multiple camcorders. So let's say that you've got 3 different 150 camcorders, and we're going to be using these in a multi-cam environment, and we want one to be the master and the other 2 to be slaves, so that all of them start their timecode at exactly the same point. Now, this isn't the same as GenLock. It doesn't lock all the camcorders up and keep them locked up. What it does is it starts all of the camcorders from a 0 point, or from the same start point. So the way that you'll do this is we'll set this first one up to be a master. We'll appear to the master mode. And what's going to happen, you'll see it says outputting the timecode signal here. Well, what you're going to need to do is take the video out that's found on the right side of the camcorder and plug that into the video out of your two slave camcorders. So basically it's yellow connector to yellow connector. You can see here the close-up of the video out. And then we'll do the same thing with the other slave. And so what this is going to do is zero out all the camcorders. They're all starting the same point. Now you can't have this in master or slave mode if you turn the menu function off. In other words, this feature is only enabled while the menu is open. We'll go ahead and crawl back out of there. Okay, and you'll notice it automatically went back to the no mode. So the same thing, we can tell this camcorder to receive timecode by putting it into slave mode. So you're going to use one camcorder as your master and all of the other camcorders in a slave mode. Pretty simple stuff, really. Next up is the AV out mode. So let's go ahead and hit the down arrow here, and that takes us to our next menu setup. We see AV out setup. And this is basically a playback setup mode. It won't affect anything that we're playing with. So let's go ahead and open this up. And the first thing we see is HDMI output select. Now there are several different modes here. We have an auto output, a fixed output, and a 480p output. Now if we set this up in auto mode, what's going to happen is it's going to automatically output whatever the recorded signal is. Now we really don't want to use this output in most modes, and I'll show you why. We're going to go to the fixed mode here. If we're in any other output mode besides fixed mode, what it does is it shuts down anything but the HDMI connector terminal. So if we want to have a simultaneous video out and an HDMI out, we're going to need to put this camcorder into fixed output mode so that it can output over HDMI and output over the component output terminal. And then finally we can set this up so that it's only outputting 480p signal off the HDMI terminal. And so if you're shooting standard def, or rather if you're wanting to view standard def, this is the way that you're going to set that up. We're going to leave that set to fixed, which is the default setting. The next we have a component out select, and we have some choices. We can either output 1080i or 480i from the component output. Now remember, the component output is the output that's found on the back of the camcorder underneath the rubber cover that we see right there. The output that's on the right hand side of the camcorder is a composite output, and that's always a standard def output format. I'm going to leave that set to auto, and then go into down convert modes. We have three different down convert modes. We can letterbox, we can squeeze it, or we can side crop. Now the main preferred method is the letterboxing mode. That allows us to see everything on the screen in an external monitor. If we use a side crop, it's going to crop the sides to play back on a typical standard definition monitor or a 4x3 monitor, but we're not going to be able to see everything that's in our picture if we're doing a live monitor. So if we use the down convert into the letterbox mode, we'll be able to see everything on the picture as the camera is recording it. And then finally we can choose squeeze, and squeeze squeezes everything up so that that output is a standard 4x3 output, but it's going to squeeze into the two sides of the screen right here. And that's something that we probably won't like on a standard output. Next we can go into the video setup, and this allows us to adjust our pedestal, whether we're shooting from 0 to 255 or we're shooting from 16 IRE. In other words, if we have a 7.5 pedestal setup, which is standard for television broadcast, but it's for webcast, you may want to take this all the way down to 0, or if you're going out to Blu-ray, you may set it up that way. Okay. Next we'll go down to audio out. We can choose whether we're outputting a stereo signal or we're hearing only channel 1 or only channel 2. So you can set this up to work either way that you'd like it to. And then finally, our last mechanism here is our HP, or headphone mode. There are two different modes here. The first one is live, and what that lets us do is it lets us monitor the signal directly from the microphone or from the external microphones coming into the camcorder. Well, why would you want to have one or the other? Because when we're in the second mode, the recording mode here, what that does is it lets us hear the signal after it's been recorded onto the camcorder. And you may hear some lag. In other words, there might be just a tiny bit of delay. And if you're you're an audio geek, this is going to be really, really annoying. On the other hand, it lets you know exactly what's being recorded. So you've got a couple of options here. Panasonic's really, really good about letting users decide exactly what they want to see and exactly what they want to hear. Personally, I leave this set to the recording mode, and I crank my headphones up a little bit so I'm not hearing too much of the audio that's taking place in the room, and I predominantly hear the audio that's going down onto my card. It's a little bit safer way to work, but either way. And just a quick note to interject here, make sure you're always wearing headphones anytime you turn on a camcorder. Practice safe video. In other words, you'd never go into a place and turn on the camcorder and just point it and hope it shoots well. You're always going to look in the viewfinder to see what the camera is looking at. By the same token, always wear headphones so that you can hear whatever the camera's hearing. Next up is the display setup, and this is one of the longer menus. It's going to take a few minutes to set this one up, but what this is going to do is set the camera up for all the different things that you see in the EVF or in the LCD viewer. So let's dig right into that one. We're going to display setup, and the first thing that we see is Zebra Detect 1. Now remember, we've got two different Zebra Detect presets, or two different Zebra display presets on the camcorder when we press the Zebra button on the side of the camcorder. Well, we can determine where that Zebra kicks in. I like mine set anywhere between 70 and 80%. So your mileage may vary, but that 70-80% point is a great point for detecting exposure on the skin. If you like the skin to be on the edge of a little bit hot, set it up at 80. If you like the skin to be just exposed properly, or maybe even a little bit underexposed, set it up to 70, but you've got your own choices, and of course we can set it up to 0 as well. So I'm going to set this up so that we're at 80%, but you can see here where we can swing this all the way down, take it down to 50%. So let's take this back up to 80, and I'm going to set this one here. Next, Zebra Detect 2. Now you notice we can take this so that it's all the way out at 105%. Well, how can there be 105% in a video signal? Quite easily. Remember that there's a difference, or there's a disparity between IRE values and RGB values. You might set it up so that it's shooting right at the very, very edge of the IRE values, but you're going to go a little bit beyond for the RGB values. So we might have it so that if we ever see that 105% indicator, we know that we've pushed our exposure too far. So this is just simply one way of controlling exactly how far we want to take our exposure. So if you want to shoot right at the limit and know that if you go 5% over, you're going to see some Zebra, this is one place you can set that up. I'm going to set mine back to 100%. Next is our marker. Now in the center of the camcorder, we have a marker that we can turn on and turn off via the Zebra button. It's the same button that turns on and off the Zebra right here on the side of the camcorder. Well, what we're going to do is we can set this so that it's on or just simply never there. That's that center point marker that we see indicated in our image. Next, our safety zone. We can set the safety zone to be 90% of our 16:9 display, or we can create an indicator that shows us a 4:3 safety zone, or no safety zone at all. It really depends on how you want to shoot. I recommend leaving it set to 90% so that you know where your action safe area is if you're shooting critical areas. For instance, maybe you're shooting a school play, and if you don't have this set up, you might find that you're shooting a lot more of the curtain on one side or the other, or a lot less of the curtain on one side or the other, when you've got a little bit more room to play with in the zoom. Just a great feature to know exactly where you're at. Next, our record counter. We can have it show the total record time, in other words, how long the camera has been running and the cumulative value of all the clips that you've shot, or we can have it show time code only for the clip values. So if you're shooting various scenes and you've got somebody logging, you may set this up so that it's only displaying the value for that specific scene or that specific clip. Okay, I'm going to set mine back to total value, scroll down again. Next is our video out or OSD menu option. OSD or on-screen display can be a very handy thing. Where would you use it? Well, let's say that you're in a production environment where you're outputting from the camera to a variety of different display monitors so that other people can see exactly what's going on, or maybe you've got some Q monitors happening, or maybe you've got somebody logging from a separate display monitor. Well, what this does, it allows us to put the overlay of, say, your aperture value and shutter speeds and Z zebra values, and all these other things out on an external monitor. Now, you may not want that if you're just a solo act, or you're just shooting to a QE monitor that only you or maybe one or two other people are looking at. Then it's not that important, but you have the choice of being able to turn on or off all that on-screen display information. Okay, so we're going to leave that set to off. Date and time stamp. We can choose to stamp the media with time, date, and off mode. We're going to leave this set to the off mode because I really don't need to see the overlay of date and time on the screen. I generally know what day it is, and I certainly have a watch to be able to turn on my clock or figure out what time it is. Next are level meters. I recommend that you always leave this on so that you can see what's happening with your audio. Pretty important to be able to meter your audio, but it might be that you've got this set up to on, and then you don't want to see it again, so you might have your levels preset. Entirely your game, but I recommend that you're always watching your audio. Zoom and focus. You can set this up so that it's a number value, or so that it's by meter value or by feet, so that you can get an idea of what your distances are. Personally, I like using a number value only for the fact that it's something for pretty well everybody to think about. Instead of saying it's a 14.5 foot zoom, instead set the zoom to a value of 11 or 15 or whatever that numeric value may be. It also is a great way to just simply be able to reference simply, but your mileage may vary. Choose whatever works best for you. Okay, card and battery information. Do we want to know how much recording time we have left on our card? Do we want to know how much recording time we've got left on our battery? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. It really depends on your particular workflow. If you're working with a large card and you're working with plugged-in AC power, such as we're working with here, then you may not care what's happening with your battery, and you don't need to have any kind of a battery display, so you can turn that off right here. Okay, we'll go down to other display, partial, all, or off. If we set this to the partial mode, it allows us to see just some of the information in the display, all of the information in the display, or none of the information in the display. I'm going to leave that set to the off mode. LCD backlight mode, we can set up to low, normal, and high. And remember, we've got the LCD switch on the side of the camcorder where we can access these same modes. So we're going to leave this set to the default of high. LCD setup, and choose yes, and it allows us to change the setup and change the display of the LCD monitor. Now remember, this does not change anything that's being recorded. It only changes how it's going to be displayed, so be real cautious as you change this. For instance, if you put too much color in your LCD panel, it might be that you think you're oversaturating and forget that you've set this, and overcompensate by the way you set up your scene files or other things with the camcorder. So as you're setting up your scene files and as you're working with the camcorder, if the LCD monitor is your primary source of display and you're not using an external monitor, as we've advocated several times in this DVD, then be really certain that all these values are set to 0. Okay, so back out of here. Our EVF setup. Do we want our electronic viewfinder turned on or not? Well, I think we do want to have our EVF set up, and we can go in and again change our color level and change our brightness level, change the contrast level, same as before. If you're setting up a scene and you're using the viewfinder, then you're going to want to be sure that you've left these set to 0. Okay, so we're going to leave this set to no here. Self-shoot. If you're shooting yourself, shooting a self-portrait, you probably want to go into mirror mode, so when you rotate the LCD display, you're seeing yourself normally as opposed to upside down and backwards. So just a real quick setting for that. Scroll back down, and EVF color, on or off. Here's a place where by default the EVF, or the electronic viewfinder, is set to the on position. I recommend that you switch this to off. It's a whole lot easier to set your focus when you're looking at something that's black and white as opposed to when you're looking at something in color. The human eye is a lot more sensitive to contrasts than it is to chroma or to color information. So it's a good idea to set this up so that your electronic viewfinder is in black and white and your LCD monitor is in color. That way you've got a little bit better way of knowing whether you're in perfect tight focus, even with the focus assist. And in fact, with the focus assist set up in black and white, your sharpness or your focus will just about always be spot on. And that gets us through all of the display setups. Next menu is the card functions option. It's a pretty quick menu. There's not a whole lot buried down in here, but it's important that you know how to use this menu and what to do in this menu. I wish it wasn't buried quite so deep because of the very first function. So let's scroll down to the menu options. First of all, card format. Do we want to record to format the card, or do we simply want to erase the card? Always, always, always format your cards after you've dumped your data over to at least one storage source instead of deleting clips. When you delete clips, you leave behind index information and other information about the files that were left on the card, and eventually you can fill the card up with a lot of little detritus and you can run into some problems in recording. Always format your cards regardless of which file-based camcorder you're using. It's critical that you format instead of delete. So we can go in and tell it whether we want to format the card, and in this case we don't, but we simply want to choose the format option. Next, we have card status. Do we want to display the card status or not? Well, here we can see what the card status is. We can see how much time is recorded and how much time remains on the card. Now we've got it set up for SD standard, so this is just a way of knowing exactly what we're dealing with the which kind of card media we're using in here. Make sure that when you're choosing a card that you always choose a class 4 or higher. Again, class 4 or higher, and this will prevent you from running into issues with your camcorder and the different kinds of recording media that you may be working with. Next is the user file, and this is a great feature. This allows us to write over up to 4 different user file settings. So if you've got some scene settings and so forth that you've saved for the camcorder, we can write up to 4 different user file settings and name them and store them on the card. So all we need to do is tell it that we do want to record those file settings. We can read them. We can write them. Now if we read them, it's going to read the information that's off the card, or if we write them, of course, it's going to store whatever's in the camcorder to the card. So we'll just select write here. And it's telling me that I don't have any file, but it's going to let me continue. So we'll just call this title 01. We're going to choose that we want to write that to the card. And it's just now written all of my presets. Even though I didn't give it a name, it's written all of my presets over to the card that's in my camcorder. Okay, so we'll exit out of here. Come back to our menu. Next, we can choose load, save, or initialize the card. Now, if we're going to load anything, we'll load up anything that's on the card, such as title 01 that we just looked at. We'll slide up. Okay, now it's loaded our card. Cycle the camera, turn it off, and then turn it back on again. So we'll turn it off and turn it back on again. Remember, it takes a couple of seconds for the camcorder to boot. So give it a moment or two to boot, but it's important that you turn the camcorder on and off after you've loaded any of the preset scene files. This can be a real big benefit to you because you can go onto a lot of different websites out there and download scene files specifically for this camcorder, so you can share some time with some of the users that are out there and do some great looks, or create some great looks. Okay. Next is our metadata option, and there's a lot of information that we can use here. First of all, we can choose to read metadata that's on there. We don't have anything in the card at the moment. Next, we'll come down to our record. Do we want to record metadata? And what is metadata? Metadata is a file within the file about the file. In other words, it contains descriptive information. You might put geographical location. Some camcorders even have GPS capability where we can input GPS coordinates to relocate the camera exactly. There's a lot of different types of metadata that can be put in there, or different flags about the file that can be put in there, such as record date and time, the type of format, etc. that's been recorded. So I'm going to turn this to on. We can choose user clip name, type 1 or type 2. Clip count reset. Yeah, we don't want to reset our clip count. And metadata properties. Let's choose yes, that we do want to record the metadata properties. And here we can see whatever metadata is involved with the particular clip. Right now, there's nothing stored into there. We haven't recorded anything with the metadata on. Go ahead and exit back out. And then finally, the metadata initialize the setup. Let's choose yes. And this initializes the setup for us so that we're ready to roll. So now we've come to the very last menu in the camera functions section of the 150 camcorder. So let's press the down arrow on our joystick and go into the other functions mode. And the first option that we have here is the IR remote. This allows us to turn on or turn off remote reception from the camcorder's included remote control. Next is the record lamp. Now there's a couple of options here. I have a personal preference, but this allows us to turn on just the front lamp or just the back lamp or both lamps or no lamps. These are the tally lights that are on the front and the back of the camcorder that let us know when we're in record mode. Now personally, I prefer never having the tally light on the front of the camcorder turned on. The reason being is a lot of talent, especially when we're dealing with amateur talent or even some semi-professional talent, the moment they see the red light on the camcorder go on, they freeze up. It doesn't matter how great their performance is, but that red light just sort of puts them in a stage fright. So I, by nature, turn this off. We used to have to put pieces of gaffer's tape over top of the lights, so it's great that the camcorder manufacturers have finally started giving us some options to turn on or turn off the tally light. So I'm going to set this up so that we're only seeing the rear light. There we go. Next is the beep sound. The beep drives me crazy. I wish no one would include this in their camcorder. I really can't find much of a use for it. But we're going to go ahead and leave this set to off. Our clock set, if we want to reset our clock, we can reset our clock. And there's our clock already set up, so we're just going to scroll back out of this and go down to our time zone. We can increase or decrease the time zone value depending on where we are. So it might be that we need to increase it or decrease it. And remember, this is something for metadata. This isn't going to change the overall time code setting, or excuse me, it's not going to change the overall timestamp of the camcorder. So just be aware that we can very easily change our time code there, or our time zone there. Scroll down to the next one, power save. Now power save is a feature that's only available when we're powering the camcorder with the battery. And power save won't go into operation if we're running on AC power. It won't go into operation if we've got no memory card inserted into the back of the camcorder here. If we are running on battery power and we've got a card inserted, then after the camera hasn't been in use for 5 minutes, it'll power itself down and put itself into a standby mode or a sleep mode. So if you're out in the field, this may save your tail by being sure that you've got plenty of battery power there. We're going to leave the power save mode turned to off. And go down to system info. Do we want to see the system info? This tells us what our software update is, and it may be that you'll want to update your software. We'll go into that a little bit later on in this DVD. Exit out. Menu initialize. The menu initialize is just basically a menu reset. Reset is probably a better word, because what it does is when we engage the menu initialize, it restores the camera back to all the factory settings, or all the menus are restored back to the factory settings. So if you're selling the camcorder, or if you've got the camcorder set up in a way that you just can't figure out what you've done wrong, this is a way to reset everything back to 0 inside the camcorder. So it's basically a reset switch more than anything else. And then finally, we have an operation time. We can see there how long the camcorder's been in operation. Okay, and this gets us through all of the other functions that are in the camcorder side of the unit. Next, we need to look at some of the playback or the card functions of the unit. Let's have a look at the playback menu operation and the way the various menus are accessible for playback. First, we've got to put the camcorder in playback mode. So how do we do that? On the back of the camcorder, we're going to press the mode button or the mode switch, and that's going to convert the camcorder. So we'll press the mode switch here. We'll see the camcorder LCD panel blink, and then we'll see a clip menu show up. So when we first put it into playback mode, it comes up with a number of different clips that are recorded on the card. So let's open up our menu just like we did before. Let's click the menu button, and it comes back with our playback menu. So the first option is our play setup. So let's execute that. Our playback format. Now we can set this up for any of the different formats. Now, the format which was recorded last becomes the default setting here, but maybe you've mixed different formats from the card. So it really depends on how the camcorder was last set up or last used. We're going to set this up to 24p, and we're going to see that clock reset real quickly there. Next, we're going to go down to repeat play. What this will do is allow us to select a clip, and the clip will play over and over and over again. This might be something that you'd want to do for a display, or maybe for a party where you just simply want to have a piece of media repeating over and over again. It's a great way to do this if you don't have a DVD deck, or maybe you haven't had time to convert something over to a DVD, or maybe you want to just simply re-examine something over and over for forensic purposes. So there's a lot of reasons you might want to use a loop or a continuous playback mode. I'm going to leave this set to off for now. Resume play. What resume play does is it allows us to start playback where the last clip was stopped. So in other words, we can set it up so that it resumes play at the last point that we viewed, or we can leave this set to off and go into the next mode, which is skip mode. We can have this play back the clip from the clip or from the clip and index. In other words, will it stop at the beginning of the last clip played, or does it stop at the end of the last index point that was viewed? So we have two different options here. I generally leave this in clip mode, but you may have some different needs in terms of playback. This is especially handy if you're using long clips instead of short scenes. And that gets us through everything that's in the playback menu setup. So let's go to our next menu, the thumbnail setup. The thumbnail mode all. When it's set to all, it shows us all of the thumbnails regardless of what format in which they were shot. Or we can set it up so that only the same format clips are displayed. Or we can set it up so that only clips with markers or clips with indexes in them are displayed. So we have a number of different options about what thumbnails are actually viewed in the LCD monitor. Now keep in mind, this doesn't affect what's recorded or what's actually played back. It only simply affects what's seen in the LCD display for access to various types of clips. I'm going to leave this set to all so that we can see everything that was in there. Next is our indicator display, and we can choose whether the indicators are shown or not shown in our playback menu. We'll leave this set to off. Go down to data display. Do we want to see time code, U-bit, time, date and time? So we've got some options here about what we're going to see in the data display that goes along with the clip. And I like showing time code because this allows us to log or to know exactly what's going on with the camcorder when we might be watching or previewing something when it comes time to edit. Next, our date format. We've got a couple of choices here. We can use the European style, which is year first, month first, or date. Or we can look at the month, day, year, which is a little more common here in America. Or we can look at the day, month, and year. So we've got some options there for how our dates are displayed. And that gets us through all of the thumbnail setups. Let's move on to our next menu setting, Operations menu. Okay, we can choose to delete clips. We can select clips and delete them, or all clips. Now, I mentioned earlier that we really don't want to delete clips if we're clearing our card. What we want to do instead is format the card, and it's really important that you format the card fairly regularly or every time you do a card dump. If you get in the habit of only deleting clips, you're going to find yourself with lots of detritus and index files and little bits laying around on the card. They're going to fill that card up pretty quickly, and you could run into corrupt data, or you may run into out-of-memory situations where the card simply has no more time on which you can record. So we can delete all of the clips, selected clips, or no clips. Next up is our index menu, and what this does is adds the indexes or subtracts the indexes from the clips. Very simple menu. And then finally, clip protect. It may be that we want to protect selected clips to make sure they can't be deleted from the camcorder. And again, this is something pretty simple. We can protect the clips. Now, bear in mind that if you format the card, anything that's protected goes right out the window. So after you've protected your clips, make sure that they're transferred properly and that you format the card when you're done, and that will clean the card off. Now, this gets us through all of the different card menus. It looks like there's more, but we've actually already done these when we were in the camera mode. So let's just take a real quick look at them. I'm going to slide back to our menus. We'll go to the switch mode. Remember, we set these up earlier. So we've got these set up to white fade, backlight, and index. I'm going to go ahead and change that white fade to backlight and user number 2 to spotlight. And we've already looked at the LCD where we set up the LCD where we wanted it controlled by brightness level. So, and then AV out setup, we've already gone through all of these different menu setups. We've gone through the display setup, the card functions, the user file, and going to the other functions. And again, we've already set all these up. So when we went through the camera menus, we set all of these different features up.